the molds we're working with today. I've got a bathtub shaped mold, which I've already started pouring in. I put some flowers in here, some natural flowers. I have these rune stones, which are going to look really cool when they're done. I already started pouring some in here. They're green. And then I'm going to pour different colors in, make different colored ones. These are the feet for the bathtub. When it's done, that's what it's going to prop it up. And then I have a dish here. It's a triple moon with a pentagram in the middle. And it's going to look nice when it's done. So let's get mixing the resin. So I'm using a two-part epoxy that I got on Amazon. You have the resin itself and you have the epoxy hardener. We're going to mix those two together in equal parts, and as you mix it thoroughly, we're going to add a little dye in to give it some color. For this, we're also going to need, I use two different measuring cups. I have a small one here and a larger one here. We need a stick to mix it all in with, and you need to wear gloves because if you get this stuff on your skin, it takes forever to get it off. Alright, so we're going to slowly mix it into equal parts. So first I add the hardener because it's thinner, and I'm going to mix about a cup's worth of resin. So we fill the hardener in to about half a cup. And now we're going to add in the resin, which from this angle you're going to see it's going to slowly rise. Well, this is a full jug, so it might actually fill quickly, but it pours out like molasses. So let's add it in here. The level is slowly going to rise. We need to get it right up to 1 cup. It's important to add equal parts of both the resin and the hardener. If you have a little too much hardener in there, it's not going to dry right. If you have too much resin in there, it won't dry at all. It's just going to leave it with a tacky surface. I've run into this problem a couple times already, and it was a total accident and I had to throw away the pieces, so it's kind of a waste. And it's not that resin's very expensive, but it's 50 bucks for these 2 jugs. We're almost there. Slow down. Let the pour. I'm going to use the stick to cut off the drippage. And there we go. We have exactly 1 cup of equal parts resin and hardener poured. Now we stir it very slowly. Stir it slowly as to avoid any bubbles getting trapped inside your resin. That's going to be a big issue, getting all the bubbles out, because those bubbles will dry in the resin and then you're going to end up with weird looking surfaces, or it's just going to look bad. We won't get a clear, usually this will dry crystal clear, so it'll look like glass when it's done, but if you have bubbles in it, the bubbles will get trapped. A lot of times they'll rise to the surface, but some of them won't, they'll get stuck. So we're going to stir it really slowly. You're supposed to stir it for about 5 minutes. They say, I mean, if you read any directions and stuff, it says stir it for at least 5 minutes, pour it into a second container and re-stir it. You have to scrape the sides really good when you're stirring this. And a lot of the bubbles will rise to the surface as you stir. You let them pop. After you're done stirring it, you can add in color, stir it around again so it's nice and evenly distributed, which we are going to do. Again, I'll show you that when we get to that point, but for now, we just have to stir and stir and stir. Make sure it's nice and evenly mixed. If it's not evenly mixed, you'll have soft spots. Spots that won't dry, spots that won't harden in the resin, whatever you pour in whatever mold. The resin I'm using is a laminate resin. This is good for smaller projects, smaller molds like this. You can pour it in layers. It's good also for if you're pouring it over like tabletops, or if you're trying to seal any kind of furniture like that, you can use this kind of resin. This is great for it. The nice part with this one is, like I said, the hardener is nice and liquidy, so it goes on nice and thin, or it pours nice and easily, whereas the resin itself is a little thicker. Pours out like molasses. There are other different types of resin that you can use. There's UV resin, which dries under a UV light, and there is a thicker form of resin also, where both parts pour out like molasses. And that's really good for doing thicker molds, which I do have a few, but most of the time I just pour them in sections. So we've been mixing it for about 5 minutes now. As you can see, the resin itself is very clear. Well, the light's making it hard to see, but the resin itself is very clear, but there's a lot of bubbles in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit for about 5 minutes. Most of those bubbles will rise to the top, and we'll use a heat gun to help pop all those bubbles. And then we're going to pour it into this secondary container here. We're going to mix in some color with that resin. That will also help mix it a little further, and more of those bubbles will rise to the top. And we'll pop them as we go. And now we drink coffee while we wait. See how most of the bubbles have risen to the top there? So we're going to take the heat gun right here, and we're going to blast it. I'm going to pop a lot of those bubbles. Alright, there's still a lot more in there, but we're going to pop those as we go. So let's pour it now into the smaller container. Alright, let's pour, so you can see, we're going to pour a little bit in here. Like that. Okay. Take the heat gun. Blast some more of the bubbles. Okay. Now we're going to add a little bit of purple dye into it. This will be the nice finished piece for the bottom of the bathtub there. Mix it up. The difficult part is making sure the dye is mixed evenly. It's a nice dark purple color. We put about 3 drops in for this amount of resin. It's just a matter of stirring it nice and easy so it all mixes in well. Now the rest of those bubbles we're going to pop when we pour into the molds. So mix it in there. A couple of minutes. Alright, it's all nice and evenly mixed, and while I was mixing it I also used the heat gun and popped a few more bubbles. So now what we're going to do is scrape our stick here, put that down on the silicone mat, and then we're going to pour it nice and slowly into the mold. You want to pour it slow and as close to the base of the mold as possible. This helps keep more bubbles from forming. A few of those bubbles in there. It's alright because they're going to rise right up to the top as this cools, and then we'll pop them. We want to fill it to the very top of the mold here. Nice and easy, we're almost there. Nice and slow. Perfect. Alright. That one's poured. Now we have enough resin in here that we're going to pour some into this piece as well. Actually, we got to pour the feet first. Sorry about that. Let's turn this. These are smaller molds, so again, you want to go nice and slow. You don't want to overfill it. Right. Just down here. So it looks like we're a little more. Perfect. That's 1 foot. There are 4 feet for this bathtub, so we're going to pour nice and easy into the rest. It's 2. Might have to add a little to that one. It's 3. 1 more. 4. Now most of these molds are made of silicone. You want to use the silicone because the resin won't dry or stick to it. And that's important because when you take the feet and other molds out, you don't want your resin objects to crumble. So we have here, we have some more left in this bin here. So now we're going to pour it into this piece, and we're going to actually add different colored resin to this as well if it doesn't completely fill. Alright, it's all poured. I poured out everything that was in there. Now if you look really closely, you can see, let's see if the camera will pick it up, there are a couple small bubbles sticking on the inside of the mold. So what we're going to do is, we're going to use this pin This is a surgical pick. And we're going to actually pick at the bubbles and push them to the surface. We're going to release them from the corners in the mold and push them right up. You don't want to have bubbles sticking to the surface of your molds because those are going to create holes in your resin. You definitely don't want holes in your resin. It's going to make it an unpaintable surface. It's going to be rough, and we want it to be nice and smooth as possible. So we're going to go through and scrape out any of the bubbles that I see in here. Perfect. Okay, now we're going to do the same with the other molds. As you can see here, there's a nice foamy surface here. Those are all bubbles that have risen up because they were small. And the resin is nice and warm from the heat gun, so it's easier to rise through the resin to the surface. Same thing with the feet here. As you can see, there's a couple little bubbles forming at the surface here. Camera focus. See there? So we have one in the foot that we're going to pop up. There we go. Another one in the foot. There we go. And once those rise to the surface, we'll hit it again with the heat gun and pop them all. Now that we've done our first pour with the purple resin, now we're going to pick a different color. We're going to pour more into the same jar. I already went through and wiped out the jar, so there's no purple resin left in it. And we're going to pour a little more into that same small container. We're going to add a different color. We're going to pour into we're going to pour a little more into the runic molds. All right, so this time we're using a color called cyan. I put 2 drops in, nearly filled the cup. We're going to mix it up here. And this will fill the runic molds over here. See, we have a couple green, though you can't see it. There is there are 3 of them poured here with lavender, or sorry, violet, a very light purple. Takes a while, but we're going to mix it good here. All right, it's all nice and mixed. There's some bubbles in there, but that's all right because we're going to pop them as we pour into these molds. All right, so we've poured all of these pieces now, all the runes, and I also went and poured these pieces here. It's going to be the chakra coins, more or less. As you can see here, there's a lot of bubbles coming up from the rocks. So I'm going to have to fish around, move around the rocks with that pin to get all the bubbles out. All right, so I've already poured all the resin. I've popped most of the bubbles. We're going to check it in regular intervals for the next 20 minutes or so and hit it with the heat gun in case any others rise up to the surface. In the meantime, we're going to clean up all the things we just poured the resin with. So like the pick, the stirring stick, and the containers themselves. So for cleanup, it's really easy. I use rubbing alcohol. I use a 70% solution and some paper towels. You literally rinse everything down with the rubbing alcohol itself, wipe it out with paper towels, and let it dry. All right, so it's been a whole 24 hours. Now, resin, type of resin I'm using, it's fully dry, but it's not fully cured yet. So when we pop these out, they're still soft and you can still bend them, but they're hard enough to touch and they're not sticky anymore. That's the important thing. So let's take a look at these and see how it looks. All right, so let's take a look at these pieces here. Okay, we've got the bathtub here and the circle coins here, as well as our runes. So let's have a look and see how these came out. It's hard to do this one-handed, but I'll do my best here. Alright, so you see it's got the nice impression of the rune itself on it that we'll paint. It's nice and clear. Very few bubbles in there, which is awesome. Let's take a look at these coins and see how they came out. Gorgeous. You can't really see it too well, but there's nice engravings on the front of these also. Alright. Now the feet for the tub. Beautiful. Alright, now let's do the bathtub. Alright. Just pry it out of here. It's the downside with some of these molds, they're a little tricky to get out.
2,000 years later.
Ta-da! Like it didn't take me 20 minutes! So let's have a look here. So this is the bathtub that I just made with resin. We have a nice violet. It's pretty translucent at the top here. Get some beautiful flowers built into it also. And the bottom is a dark purple. Flip it upside down. And the feet should slide right into here. Just like that. Look at that. We got one foot. And there you have it. Our chakra stones with actual stones in them. We got our nice beautiful bathtub. And we have these beautiful runes. All done with resin. And that's all.